They called me a nightmare at school because of ADHD. Today I'm back there as a speaker. I never thought I'd return to Jefferson Elementary School. The same hallways where I was labeled a problem child, where teachers whispered about my behavioral issues, and where my hyperactivity made me the target of endless complaints. My name is Marcus, I'm 28 years old, and I have ADHD. Today I'm walking through those same doors, but this time, I'm here to give a speech to the faculty about neurodivergent students. If you believe that our differences can become our greatest strengths, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel for more inspiring stories about overcoming adversity. The irony isn't lost on me as I adjust my tie and carry my presentation materials down the corridor where I once ran frantically, unable to sit still, bouncing off walls both literally and figuratively. Mrs. Henderson, my 5th grade teacher, is still here. She's the one who once told my mother, "Your son is unteachable. He's disrupting the entire class with his constant movement and inability to focus." I was 8 when the labels started. Hyperactive, disruptive, attention-seeking. Back then, ADHD wasn't as well understood as it is today. Teachers saw a boy who couldn't sit still, who blurted out answers without raising his hand, who seemed to bounce from one activity to another without completing anything. They saw a nightmare student, not a child whose brain worked differently. The worst part wasn't the academic struggles, though those were significant. It was the social isolation. During recess, other kids would avoid me because I was too much. I'd try to join their games, but my enthusiasm would overwhelm them. I'd interrupt their conversations, not because I was rude, but because my brain processed thoughts faster than social conventions allowed. Parents would pull their children away from me at school events, whispering warnings about the troubled kid. My parents, God bless them, tried everything. Behavior charts, reward systems, countless meetings with teachers and administrators. My mother would cry after parent-teacher conferences, not knowing how to help me succeed in a system that seemed designed for children who were nothing like me. My father, who I later learned also had ADHD, would get frustrated because he recognized the same struggles he'd faced as a child. The breaking point came in 4th grade with Mrs. Patterson. She was known as the strict teacher, the one who ran a tight ship. On my first day in her class, she looked at me and said, "I've heard about you, Marcus. We're going to fix this behavior problem once and for all." She implemented a system where I had to sit in the front row, hands folded, eyes forward at all times. Any movement, any fidgeting, any sign of my hyperactivity would result in a red mark on the board next to my name. By the end of the first week, the board was covered in red marks. By the end of the month, I was spending more time in the principal's office than in class. Mrs. Patterson would send notes home daily. Marcus couldn't sit still during math. Marcus called out answers during reading. Marcus was tapping his pencil during silent work time. Each note felt like a nail in the coffin of my self-esteem. The other students noticed, of course. They'd whisper when I walked by, counting the red marks on the board. Some would deliberately try to get me in trouble, knowing how quickly I'd react. Sarah Mitchell, the class star student, once asked me in front of everyone, "Why can't you just be normal?" The word stung because I'd been asking myself the same question every day. I began to believe I was broken, that there was something fundamentally wrong with me that couldn't be fixed. I'd lie awake at night, promising myself I'd be better tomorrow, that I'd sit still, that I'd raise my hand, that I'd be the student everyone wanted me to be. But the next day, my body would betray me again. My leg would bounce. My hands would fidget. My mind would race from one thought to another. The academic consequences were devastating. My grades plummeted not because I couldn't understand the material, but because I couldn't demonstrate my knowledge in the ways the school demanded. Tests were torture sessions where I'd know the answers but couldn't focus long enough to write them down. Group projects were nightmares where I'd be excluded or assigned menial tasks because teachers didn't trust me with important responsibilities. Mrs. Patterson's final straw came during a science lesson about the solar system. I'd been fascinated by astronomy since I was 6, spending hours reading about planets and stars. When she asked about Jupiter's moons, I couldn't contain my excitement. I jumped up, started explaining not just the 4 largest moons she'd asked about, but rattling off facts about all 79 known moons, their discovery dates, and their characteristics. Instead of recognizing my knowledge and passion, she saw disruption. "Marcus, sit down immediately. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You can't just burst out with information nobody asked for. You're showing off and disrupting the learning environment for everyone else." She sent me to the principal's office with a note that read, "Marcus is clearly seeking attention and needs immediate intervention. Principal Johnson was tired of seeing me. Son, you're in here more than you're in class. We need to have a serious conversation about your future at this school." He implied that maybe I needed to be in a special school for children with behavioral problems. The threat of being sent away from the only school I'd ever known, away from my neighborhood friends, terrified me. That night, I overheard my parents talking in hushed tones about homeschooling, about alternative schools, about medication options. My mother was crying, saying she felt like she was failing me. My father was angry, not at me, but at a system that seemed determined to crush my spirit. "He's not a bad kid," he kept saying. "He's just different." The transformation began with a substitute teacher named Ms. Rodriguez. Mrs. Patterson was out sick for a week, and Ms. Rodriguez took over our class. She was young, energetic, and had a completely different approach to teaching. Instead of demanding we sit perfectly still, she incorporated movement into learning. We'd do math problems while standing, act out historical events, and have discussions while walking around the classroom. For the first time in years, I felt successful in school. I could focus better when I was moving. My hand-raising became purposeful rather than compulsive. Ms. Rodriguez noticed my deep knowledge in subjects that interested me and found ways to channel that enthusiasm productively. When I shared my astronomy knowledge, she said, "That's incredible, Marcus. Would you like to prepare a presentation for the class next week?" The presentation was a revelation. When I was passionate about a subject and given the freedom to express myself authentically, I could captivate an audience. My classmates, who had previously seen me as disruptive, were genuinely interested in what I had to say. For 30 minutes, I wasn't the problem child, I was the expert. Ms. Rodriguez pulled me aside after class. "Marcus, you have an amazing mind. You process information differently than other kids. But that's not a weakness. It's a superpower. You just need teachers who understand how to help you use it." She recommended that my parents have me evaluated by a specialist, not for behavioral problems, but for learning differences. The evaluation was extensive. Dr. Sarah Chen, a neuropsychologist who specialized in ADHD, spent hours with me doing tests, puzzles, and interviews. She explained that my brain wasn't broken. It was wired differently. The hyperactivity that teachers found disruptive was actually a sign of a mind that processed information at an incredibly fast pace. The inability to sit still wasn't defiance. It was a neurological need for movement that actually helped me focus. "Marcus," Dr. Chun explained, "people with ADHD often have something called hyperfocus. When you're interested in something, you can concentrate on it more intensely than most people. That's why you know so much about astronomy, why you can remember every detail about subjects that fascinate you. Your brain is looking for stimulation, and when it finds something engaging, it locks on completely." She also explained that many successful entrepreneurs, artists, and innovators have ADHD. Our brains are wired for creativity, for thinking outside the box, for making connections that others miss. The same traits that made me a problem in traditional classroom settings could be tremendous assets in the right environment. Armed with this new understanding, my parents advocated for accommodations. I was allowed to use a standing desk, take movement breaks, and demonstrate my knowledge through presentations and projects rather than just written tests. Teachers began to see my contributions as valuable rather than disruptive. My grades improved dramatically, but more importantly, my self-esteem began to heal. Middle school brought new challenges, but also new opportunities. I discovered debate team, where my quick thinking and passionate arguments were assets. I joined the school newspaper, where my hyperfocus helped me research stories thoroughly. I started an astronomy club that grew from 3 members to 30 by the end of the year. High school was where everything clicked. I had learned to advocate for myself, to ask for the accommodations I needed, and to recognize my strengths. I maintained a high GPA while being involved in multiple extracurricular activities. My senior year, I was chosen as valedictorian, a title I never could have imagined receiving back in elementary school. College presented new challenges, but I was prepared. I studied communications and education, determined to become an advocate for neurodivergent students. I learned about the latest research on ADHD, about accommodations and teaching strategies, about the importance of understanding rather than just managing differences. After graduation, I worked for several years as a communications specialist for a nonprofit organization focused on educational equity. I spoke at conferences about neurodiversity, wrote articles about inclusive teaching practices, and consulted with schools on supporting students with learning differences. The call to return to Jefferson Elementary came last month. The new principal, Dr. Martinez, had heard about my advocacy work and wanted me to speak to the faculty about supporting students with ADHD. "We want to do better," she explained. "We want to understand how to help all our students succeed." Standing in the faculty lounge where teachers once complained about my behavior, I felt a mix of emotions. Nervousness, certainly, but also excitement about the opportunity to create change. Mrs. Henderson was there, now in her 60s, approaching retirement. She approached me before my presentation. "Marcus, I owe you an apology. I didn't understand then what I understand now. I thought strict discipline would help you, but I was wrong. I'm sorry for the pain I caused you." Her words meant more than I expected they would. My presentation focused on the science of ADHD, on the difference between accommodations and modifications, on the importance of seeing strengths rather than just challenges. I talked about my own journey, about the teachers who helped and those who hindered, about the potential that exists in every neurodivergent student. ADHD isn't an excuse, I explained. It's an explanation. When you understand why a student behaves the way they do, you can find ways to help them succeed. The child who can't sit still might focus better while standing. The student who blurts out answers might need a different system for participating. The kid who seems scattered might actually be making connections you haven't considered. I shared strategies: movement breaks, fidget tools, flexible seating options, project-based assessments, and the importance of finding each student's area of passion and expertise. I talked about the research showing that people with ADHD often become successful entrepreneurs, artists, and innovators, not despite their ADHD, but because of the unique ways their brains work. The response was incredible. Teachers asked thoughtful questions, shared stories of students they were struggling to support, and expressed genuine interest in learning more. Mrs. Patterson, now retired but visiting for the presentation, approached me afterward. "I was wrong about you, Marcus. I thought I was helping by being strict, but I was just teaching you to hide who you were. I'm proud of the man you've become, and I'm sorry for the boy I failed to understand." After the presentation, I walked through the hallways again, but this time with Dr. Martinez. She pointed out changes they'd made: flexible seating in classrooms, quiet spaces for students who needed breaks, movement-based learning activities, and teachers trained in recognizing and supporting learning differences. "We have a student now who reminds me of how you were described," she said. 8 years old, brilliant, passionate about dinosaurs, can't sit still. Instead of seeing him as a problem, we see him as a paleontologist in training. He gives presentations to other classes about prehistoric creatures, and his enthusiasm is contagious. That evening, I received an email from Mrs. Henderson. She had attached a photo from my 4th grade class, with me in the front row, looking miserable and anxious. "I want to remember this child," she wrote, "not because of how he struggled, but because of how he persevered. Thank you for showing us that our differences make us stronger." The most rewarding part of my return wasn't the apologies or the recognition. It was the invitation to become a regular consultant for the school district. Dr. Martinez asked me to help develop policies and training programs for supporting neurodivergent students. The nightmare student was now being asked to help create dreams for other children like him. As I drove home that day, I thought about the 8-year-old boy who used to hide in the bathroom to avoid going to class, who believed he was fundamentally broken, who couldn't understand why he couldn't be normal. I wished I could tell him that his differences weren't flaws to be fixed, but gifts to be nurtured, that the energy that seemed disruptive would one day fuel his passion for advocacy, that the mind that couldn't focus on worksheets would one day captivate audiences with presentations about inclusion and understanding. I thought about all the students currently struggling in schools that don't understand their needs, all the teachers who want to help but lack the knowledge, all the parents who are fighting for their children's right to learn in ways that work for them. There's so much work still to be done, but change is possible. The next week, I received a letter from a second-grade student named Emma. Her teacher had told her about my visit and my story. She wrote, "Dear Mr. Marcus, I have ADHD too, and sometimes I feel sad because I'm different. But my teacher says different can be good. Can you come talk to my class about dinosaurs? I love dinosaurs too, and I move a lot, but my teacher says that's okay. Thank you for helping my school understand kids like us." Reading Emma's letter, I realized that returning to Jefferson Elementary wasn't just about healing my own wounds or educating teachers. It was about ensuring that the next generation of neurodivergent students wouldn't have to endure what I did. They would grow up in schools that celebrated their differences, teachers who understood their needs, and classmates who valued their unique perspectives. The transformation wasn't just in me. It was in the institution that had once failed me. The school that had labeled me a nightmare was now committed to ensuring that every child, regardless of how their brain worked, could dream of success. That's the real victory, not just personal healing, but systemic change that will benefit countless students for years to come. Today, I continue my advocacy work, speaking at schools, training teachers, and consulting with districts about inclusive education. Every presentation I give, every policy I help develop, every teacher I train is a step toward a world where neurodivergent students are valued for their unique contributions rather than punished for their differences. The nightmare student has become the dream advocate, and the school that once couldn't handle my energy is now channeling that same intensity to create positive change for all students. Sometimes the greatest victories come from returning to the places where we faced our deepest challenges, not to relive the pain, but to transform it into purpose.